Okay, let's start with the prayer, everybody. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Saint John Paul II. Pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Lucy. Grab some notes. Right, welcome everybody. For those who are new, who may not know me, I think there's only a few of you. My name's Father Jeremy. Obviously, I'm the parish priest here. And you've heard through some media mechanism of the course that we're doing tonight and come along. So most welcome to our little parish here in West Auckland. For everybody else, of course, you know why you're here. We're coming to do a special course called, as we well know, the Theology of the Body. And we're going to take a number of weeks to look at this particular topic. I would have loved to have developed a whole slideshow, PowerPoint presentation over the weeks that we're going to be looking at this particular course, like I did with the liturgy course for those who came a number of years ago. But I just haven't had the time, really. It's an enormous work to put that kind of length of content into a PowerPoint presentation. So what you've got in front of you, the block of notes that you've picked up, these are the things that I've written a number of years ago that I've used when I've taught the long version of this course. So we're going to be doing the long version of it to go into depth on it. I'm giving you the notes at the beginning so that you can get a sense of where we're going, read ahead if you like, sort of know what's coming, so that you get a strong sense that this is a content that's worth diving into and staying with. I know that with the busyness of life today, and especially with the younger people, sometimes there's a tendency we just sort of plug in and out of things, and that's understandable. I know there's many demands on people's times and their rhythms and timetables, so it's not a problem really. But I'd just say a little encouragement at the beginning of this course to try to stay with it. Try to come every Thursday, try to go through the whole thing with us, because it'll be enormously beneficial if you haven't heard or studied any of this stuff before. If you have heard a little bit, it will take you deeper, and it will help you stay with the progression that we're going to go through. So even if it can seem a little bit maybe intellectual at times, or even a little bit dry, we'll try to make sure that it's interactive and satisfying us, both our head and our heart. So there you've certainly got the study notes, so please bring it back with you. I won't print a copy every week, for obvious reasons. So each time you come on a Thursday, bring these with you so that you can use the particular content. There's also this diagram. We'll look at that in weeks to come. Obviously, there's some here tonight who will know this stuff and heard it before. Others will hear it the first time. And we've got a few who are in their younger years wanting to learn what Pope John Paul II gave to the church a number of years ago and step into it in a healthy way. This stuff is really the best stuff in the church today for really looking at all of the problems we've got around sexual morality in the modern world. It's incredibly insightful and very helpful. Every time I've taught it to the young adults, it always brings people closer to Christ. It really gives them insight into the why, the wisdom of the church's teaching on sexuality. And it fortifies us against the errors of the world, the modern world, and all the problems we've got today around this stuff. So it's very, very helpful and very deep, and I hope that you'll stay with it all the way through as we go. The first thing, just to give some basics, as you can see this on the front page. Obviously, the church speaks of a theology of the body, a noun phrase that we use, the theology of the body, because John Paul II called it that. And John Paul II is the author of it. He gave it in a number of his public Wednesday audience addresses. So between the years 1980, 1979, 1984, I should say, so really 5 years, every Wednesday he laid out this teaching on the body and the insight that he had on it. And we'll look at why, we'll look at what's in behind that, and then we'll dive into his thought. And over time, it took a little bit of time for the church to cotton on to how beautiful and deep this was. The Vatican put it together, all these were transcribed, put into a book, and it's about this big. So an enormous work. And then in time, some theologians around the world began to read it and then write their own books that were interpreting it. And this has given incredible light on the church's teaching on sexuality especially, but much more than that. So what is the theology of the body really? Some people might think of it purely as a kind of a chastity course, till we control our desires at the sexual level, the body. Yeah, it's going to have that in it, but it's much more than just a course that's going to give practical tips or even some more insightful thoughts on how to be chaste. It's really, the theology of the body is trying to get God's gaze, God's wisdom, God's intention on the body, on the human body, why he gave us a body when he created us. He created the angels, and then he proceeds to make the human person as a mix of spirit and matter, of soul and body. And why did God give us a body? What is his wisdom on it? And that's really the attempt of John Paul II. He's wanting to understand God's mind on the mystery of having a body. We all have one. We all experience our whole life in it, and this earth, certainly. And there he's wanting to step in to all the confusion in the 20th century on the human body and give a Catholic response. Welcome, welcome. There's some notes there, just on the front, and there's a diagram on the chair there. It's really trying to give a Catholic response to all the problems of the 20th century and now the 21st century, all the misunderstanding on the human person, especially around the mystery of the body. It's trying to say, we have wisdom on this. This is, first of all, for Christians to understand what they're called to live and how to reply to the world, but also for the world at large. This is the gaze of the Catholic Church on the body, on the mystery of the body. So that's why we can say a theology. God is the author of the body ultimately, and then God himself will assume a body in the incarnation. Jesus Christ will take a human nature, which is a human body, and then a rational soul. So there, if God himself has assumed and carries a body, and then still has a body in heaven for all eternity, Jesus is ascended and glorified in his human body, then we can definitely do a theology on the body. Not just a philosophy and not just a science on the body, but we can certainly do a theological study of the body. And that's what the Pope's doing. The Pope will try to look at the body from a theological perspective, which really means what I've been saying. What is God's gaze and wisdom on the body? And we all know, I'm sure everyone in the room, I think, is probably well versed in all the problems today around the body. From the 20th century and the socialism and communism of where man is reduced to being just a cog in an atheistic machine and is abused, and that happened in the Soviet system in the most horrible way. Up to 50 to 60 million people killed in the Soviet gulags, they think. Then the middle of the 20th century with Nazi fascism, and the way that the body was so wrongly treated by the Nazis, especially the Jews and the Holocaust camps, but also the way that they treated the gypsies, the way they treated the intellectually handicapped, the experiments they did on them, the experiments they did on babies, for those who are aware of all of that stuff, as well as the way they treated Catholics in the process. Such a disregard of the human person and such violence brought against the human body, such disrespect against the human body. So this is all part and parcel of the 20th century history. John Paul II, as we well know, he grew up. He was, a young man during the Second World War. He was in Poland. He lived through the Nazi occupation and oppression. He saw what they did with the Jews. He knew Jews and helped hide them. And then he later goes on to be a priest and then a bishop, of course, cardinal, then pope. He's well aware of the evil, the absolute evil that has been done in the 20th century of man against man in a way which we haven't seen in previous centuries. There's always been wars, there's always been nastiness and evil and violence, but the magnitude of it and the way it was done because of the ideologies, the atheistic ideologies that were in play. John Paul II knows this, and then he lives through, for those young ones, you may not be aware, but in 1968, in the last century, there was a thing called the sexual revolution that blew up. It had been brewing all the way through, from halfway through the 19th century, so the 1850s or so. You're beginning to get the lax morals being brought in, and then that emerges more and more and more in the 20th century. The way that women are clothed, it's changing. They're starting to become more provocative in what they wear. The bikini gets designed in France, and then becomes part of women's fashion, such that all of this stuff is coming to a head, such that in 1968, and there was revolution, social revolution all around the world, from Argentina to Bucharest, welcome guys, to many of the European cities on the European continent, to London, to New York, to San Francisco, all the major westernized cities in North and South America and in Europe exploded with all sorts of protests in the streets of students, especially university students, wanting to break free from their cultural, moral, and religious past. So everything they'd received, mainly Christian, all their Christian heritage, there was a spirit of revolution in the air that expanded very violently in 1968 with all these protests, mainly from university students saying, we want social freedom, we want education to change, and we want sexual freedom. We want to be able to not be crushed by what we believe are ancient, medieval, old Christian morals. We want the freedom to express ourselves freely. And, you know, the women were burning their bras, for those who've seen the videos of all of that. There was all this sense of we want freedom in this regard. Freedom to sleep with who we want. We don't want the moral judgments of Christians, etc., etc. Very, very strong. And we are living as the beneficiaries, not in a good way, but in a bad way, of all of this movement now. What we know now, with the whole culture that's obsessed with sexuality in one way or another, with OnlyFans, the normalization of prostitution across a whole section of society, like ordinary girls thinking that this is a legitimate way to make money in order to, you know, survive, or not only survive but to thrive. The stats on OnlyFans is horrific. Not only those who use it, but the women who are involved in selling themselves through it. And it's been normalized. It's the normalization of prostitution across the board. Not just sort of in the back streets where remember we changed the laws in New Zealand, and many countries have changed the laws so that it can happen in the brothels, but now it happens in one's bedroom to another person's bedroom, and the internet has obviously enabled that. So we are now right at this point where sexuality is seen as a plaything. Sexuality is seen as a commodity, complete commodity to be bought and sold, and in and through the body, the abuse of the human body. And of course, we don't need to mention, I'm just giving you some of it, all the breakdown of the relationship between man and woman, then the breakdown of the connection between making love and marriage and fruitfulness and having children, so that's been separated by contraception, then the breakdown of man and woman within marriage, so divorce and separation. We're just in the introduction, so grab some notes, and there's a diagram there, just on the page there. Then, of course, with that flowing onwards, the rise of the homosexual lobby to try to find freedom for the homosexual movement, and then from that to legitimize this and normalize that whole behavior, and then pursue gay marriage, and then pursue the adoption of children into homosexual couples, etc., through legal means. And then the transgenderism that we're facing, where people believe that they can redesign their body, redesign who they are according to their imaginary ideas, and impose that in a very strong way on the body by reassignment surgery. They're doing violence against the body in order to fit whatever one's imaginary construction of who they are is. So we are in a very, very unique moment in history. So don't underestimate it. Most of history, there's been various sins. Adultery has always been there from the very beginning. A bit of prostitution here and there. Mistresses allowed. There's always been difficulty in marriage, no doubt, between man and woman, and the struggles of all of that and having children. But never in the history of the world have we seen such rapid social change on all the morals and the way that we live, right down to the point now where we must not only allow these groups to express themselves, but we must approve of it. And if we don't approve of it, we'll be attacked as... Come, Sarah. Welcome, guys. Come. There's some notes, actually. We might just pass them over to you. Thanks, Daniel. Welcome. Come. So yes.
So, way early on in the introduction, you distinguished between philosophy and theology, and I'm not confident I know the difference.
Okay, very good. So the question is, what is the difference between theology and philosophy? Because we're doing a theology of the body. Theology is really, what's the best way to explain it from a Christian perspective? Theology is a searching into the revelation to understand what God has told us about himself and about man. So we're searching into what God has revealed. That's Christian theology as opposed to natural theology. There is a thing called natural theology where we search to know something about God, but from a philosophical perspective. So we're reaching God through our natural search and our intelligence, rising up through all the different levels of philosophy. We reach the existence of God through philosophy. Plato and Aristotle, mainly Aristotle, did this. That's natural theology. When we're speaking of the theology of the body here of John Paul II, we're talking about supernatural theology. So we're searching into what God has revealed about himself, not just what we can discover philosophically, to understand what God's intention is on man giving us a body, and what his intention is on the body in Christ when we see the incarnation. Philosophy itself is the search for wisdom at the natural level. That's what it means in Greek. Philosophia, the love of wisdom. And so it's trying to understand the makeup of the natural world, or the why of things, the how of things, the what of things, the for what of things, the by what of things. That's philosophy. And scientific knowledge, which we're very, very, very strong in now in the modern world, to the exclusion of the other types of knowledge. Scientific knowledge is all it's doing is just looking at the movement of matter and the laws which govern the phenomena of the movement of matter. So science, strictly speaking, doesn't even ask what is matter. It can't really answer that. It's really only asking what is the movement of matter and what are the laws that govern the movement of matter. That's scientific knowledge. We're very good at that. We know right down to the atomic level, different things and how they interact, right, through chemicals and all of that, right? Right up to, we build these gadgets today that are incredible. Philosophical knowledge, just to repeat it, is our search for wisdom at the natural level in all the areas. And the philosophical search for wisdom can reach the existence of God. Aristotle does it. And there we have a little bit of minimum knowledge. It's a very poor knowledge on God. So that's a bit of theology. It's what we call natural theology. So knowledge on God. But when we speak of the theology of the body, it is searching into what God has revealed to know God's wisdom on the human body, both in the creation and in the redemption. And that's what the Pope is doing. The Pope is not doing a philosophy. He's not trying to enter the schools of philosophy and have a debate with them about the human person. The Pope is wanting to give a Christian answer to all the problems today that I've just sort of tried to give a brief catalogue of before some of the others who come into the room just a bit after that. So we've gone through, the descent to where we are now. So this is what we're joining. This is why we come tonight, the next 9 weeks, and I encourage you to stay with it because it will be very, I think, fruitful for your study and knowledge on the faith. This is what we'll be studying. We'll be following the thought of John Paul II. Come on, guys, there's some notes here, just there, and there's some diagrams down the bottom there. And I think there's some seats maybe on the far side if we can shuffle. Welcome, guys. Come around this way if you want. There's some seats on the far side there. Come around the front. Just a little gentle reminder that we do start at 7. It's okay. What I normally do each week, I wait till about 10 past because I know the traffic can be bad. People get stuck in the traffic and sometimes work. So I'll try and wait. Come, Ralph. There's some notes there and a diagram. So please do try and be here by 7 if you can. So John Paul II is aware of all of this history, seeing it all unfold. Very smart man. He's a bishop in Krakow. He develops all this thought, and when he becomes Pope, he decides, okay, I will download to the church. I'm sure he's moved by the Holy Spirit to do this, to share with the church his reflection on what he thinks is needed on the mystery of the human body. He knows the old ways that sexual ethics has been taught in the church. He knows the virtue ethics that often got taught, the manuals of moral theology. He knows all of that. That's what he was formed in. But he thinks we need a new way and a different approach for the modern time. And I totally agree with him. We can't just repeat, as good as it might be, and we'll do some of it in our course, we can't just repeat some of the old ways of trying to teach sexual morality from the past, because we're in a very different world. All of us, I think, every single one of us in the room, maybe except the young ones, will have been affected by the culture. So even those who've come to New Zealand from other lands, you might have had probably a more wholesome upbringing in the islands. You're away from the corruption of the Western world in a way. Still, even though, even today, I think every part of the planet and the globe is affected by television, by movies, by music, by MTV, by the media, by the internet now, such that all the ways of the world come right down into people's homes, right into our little gadgets and screens that are in front of us, such that the morality of the world touches the bad morality of the world is affecting everybody. I don't think there's really too many exceptions to it, to be honest. So, therefore, yes, this is important for all of us to understand the deep whys on the mystery of the human body and why God's given us, and then why has God given us desires for intimacy and sexual contact and all of that. We must, in a way, go back to the sources and do a new research, and He's done that for us. And it doesn't eclipse the other stuff. We import, we inherit, and we continue to work with the older ways of transmitting the church's teaching, but we just update it, as it were. We develop it in a deeper way. So you'll see that as we go, there's a deeper way of approaching things, which I think is needed. And we'll come on to that as we go. Any thoughts or comments at the moment? Okay. So really feel free to raise your hand as we go and ask questions. If there's anything that's not clear, anything you want to add, any thoughts that you think I've missed and could be said, please don't hesitate to do that. I don't want it to just to be a dry lecture, as it were. I have a few health issues, so I generally have to sit these days when I'm teaching, so a little bit less dynamic, as it were. But don't let that hold you back if there's any further thoughts. Okay, so let's just have a look at the front page on the notes and work through some of what's behind what I've been talking about. There are many ideologies at work today. So this is a little bit, again, why we're getting this response from the church. An ideology, what is an ideology? It's a system of thought that begins with an idea rather than starting in reality. We want to be realists as Christians. God has given us an intelligence in our soul, and we search for the truth both at the natural level and then in the revelation, the supernatural level. We're made to know the truth. We should always begin in the real world in our search for the truth. And when I say that, sure, we get a lot downloaded in the revelation. God downloads a whole lot in Christ and then transmitted to us through the church, and there it's handed to us on a platter. So the truth comes through an authoritative modality, which is the church. Beautiful, we receive that. When I talk about we're made to search for the truth and we start at the natural level, I'm just talking about any search for the truth, whether it's scientific, philosophical, anything. We must always go back to the real world. If we start only in ideas and then we build up systems of thought based in here, in the imagination, that's where ideologies come from. And their ideologies normally are taking something true, otherwise they wouldn't get their whole mechanism running, and they reduce it down to a singular thing or just a couple of things at the expense of other important dimensions of reality. If we're going to want to know the real world, search for the truth in the real world, we want to take all of it in and try to get it all of in its right order. That's what Aristotle does. That's what the Greek philosophers tried to do. Some other philosophers have tried to do since. The Catholic Church's philosophers have certainly done it very well. Thomas Aquinas is the best example. But just be aware of that we as Catholics, we're not working with a system of belief, okay? Sometimes we hear it said, we have a system of belief and we have a system of ideas. No. Our faith is a mystery revealed, that we adhere to a mystery, which is real. That's the reality of God himself coming in. And we want to adhere to the reality of the real world and know it as best as we can, as far as we can. And there we're not ideologues. We are not into ideologies, nor are we into systems of thought. Even though Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas will break things down, we are not into ideologies. It's very important. When we're doing a study of the human body, we're wanting to be realistic and realists. So some of the ideologies, as we come in and begin, behind the problems, all the moral problems around the human body, around sexuality, around identity, all the identity problems and the identity politics, they have ideologies that sit in behind them. The reason we've got an enormous number of errors and then serious suffering that human beings have to go through because of those errors and the way they're politically applied to them is because upstream there are ideologies that have been adopted in various ways in the modern world. So let's just have a look at a few of them and you'll recognize them. If you're a little bit older, if you're a bit younger, you might hear them for the first time. Materialism, very strong today. Only matter determines. So there's no spiritual world. There's no God. There's no spirit. We're just clever monkeys. I don't know if you've ever met anybody who thinks that. Have you? In your life, in your working life, in universities especially, right? We're just a special kind of monkey that has special thinking properties that we've developed through the chemicals in our brain. A little bit like magnetism. You know how you get metal? And it has this invisible property of magnetism. That's what, honestly, a number of philosophers think, that we've developed these properties with the chemicals in our brain that allow us to be conscious, and then we've developed thought from that. Now, that's the materialist conception of man. We're only a body, in other words. Now, if we're only a body, we're no surprise if we think that our body fully determines us. It sets our course and we can't deviate from it. And the worst end of it is where we think that we're just fully determined by our genes. I've been born with genes that just made me this way, and I have to sort of just follow the way my genes have made me to be. There's no question of morality a lot there. The worst materialists will think that, whatever works, whatever's efficient, whatever is beneficial to me in the moment normally, we can do. The morality is reduced right down to just what is possible in terms of the efficiency to do with matter. You find this in the medical world with doctors often. Not all doctors. Many doctors are good ethicists and many are Christians. But I have met doctors who think that, someone's in a coma, they've got no use, just put them out of their misery and get rid of them. They're no benefit to the society anymore. A baby in the womb who's handicapped, just get rid of it because there's only the body, it's just the materials, etc., etc. This is the consequence, the downstream, very real consequence of a materialism. Now, that's also going to play out in, if we're only a monkey with only a body, then when we have desires at the sexual level, what's to stop us from going for it? If this is all there is in this life, why not enjoy it to the fullest? That's the result of a materialism, and it's very, very strong today. Very strong among well-educated people as well as less educated people, for obvious reasons. The desire for pleasure is common to all there. The next one down on the list, positivism. This is where, especially what we call empirical knowledge or scientific positivism, is that the only thing that I can discover as true is only scientific knowledge. Now, if I'm trapped in this, where I think that only science gives me the truth, I will be having a problem to discover that I have a soul, or that my friend has a soul, because I can't measure the soul. I can't measure, by definition, what's spiritual. So if I'm only a materialist, and I think that I can still get some truth on the material world that I measure with the cleverness of my scientific instruments, that's my only source of truth, is a scientific truth. And if that be the case, then I'm gonna be stuck. I won't believe that I can actually discover something that's true and real but might be invisible. You know, in the Creed every Sunday, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. That's part of our faith, right? The angels and God himself. But even at a good philosophy, we can discover the soul, which is not measurable and it's invisible. And if I'm only a scientist who believe that there's only a truth at the material scientific level, I've already shut down my intelligence to a level, a dimension of reality that is real, but I believe I can't access. And there I will stunt my own growth. Welcome. Come. There's some notes here, and there's a handout there, and there's a spare seat on that side, and a few just there. Any thoughts or comments on that? Another version of positivism, you can get legal positivism. The UN today, and at the moment I'm giving a bit of a preamble, okay? So we'll get into the text of the Theology of the Body, we'll look at the Pope's thought, we'll go through all of this, right? This is kind of the introductory preamble to lay out and essentially lay out the ways it all goes wrong in order to then say, this is the way we need to go to get it right from a Christian perspective. So just giving you the map. Once you get in, we'll look very much at all of the Pope's beautiful thinking on this, but I'm laying out deliberately at the beginning the errors we face today, which are very strong, either that we can sort of see them in our own environment, we know our colleagues or our student friends are like that, our family members might be like this, or we see it in the culture at large, or we might even have a little bit of thinking like this ourselves, even as Christians, as Catholics. We might have imbibed something of the culture. So I'm just wanting to show the landscape before we move forward to the right way of discovering the truth on these things. Legal positivism is where I believe that just whatever the law asserts by the collective decision of men is sort of the morality that I'll follow as true. So the UN is like that today, right? We all determine that there's a universal right to abortion. That's what the UN has done in its Charter on Human Rights. And they're getting close now. I think they've already done it. You know, there's a universal right to being gay and getting married in a gay marriage, etc. So do we just follow the laws of man, and do they just determine morality by a fiat, a snap of the fingers, legal diktats that come down from some authority, or is there much more to be said on this, and have those things been right? And a good example close to home in New Zealand, we have laws on the books which allow abortion. These are unjust laws, obviously. These are seriously immoral laws. So obviously just the legal diktats should not determine our morality. They should be an expression of a deeper morality that is properly grounded in the natural moral law and in God's law. When the law doesn't do that, it's a sign of a deep sickness in the society, a deeply sick society, when we think we can murder either the elderly, which we can do. We have now assisted dying laws on the books in New Zealand, and we have abortion laws. So at both ends of life, where we seem to be a little bit handicapped or unwell or sick or not very useful, we have laws which allow the getting rid of human beings. So, the seriousness of this, the Nazis were doing this kind of stuff. And we've become so accustomed to it, haven't we? The laws on abortion, we kind of just, even as Christians, it's just there. We kind of accepted it in a certain way. Not saying we agree with it at all, but you know, it's become, at least everyone looks back and says, the Nazis were so wrong, so evil what they did. But many of those evils are now embedded in our societies. And we kind of just think it's second nature to the way we are now. So they're a big problem. Any thoughts or comments on that? Voluntarism, from the Latin root meaning at the level of my will. The assertion of my will is my key thing. Only freedom and then consent really makes my life worthwhile. This is very common from the French philosophers of the 20th century especially, but just before. Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, he thought that what determines your true human dignity is your freedom, and really there should not be any real constraints on your freedom. And some of the French philosophers went so far as to say the most human decision is a suicide for no reason at all. Because you're not determined, you're not being pressured by anything. There's nothing coming at you. Just the meaningless taking of your own life is the sign of your great dignity, because you can freely choose without anything coming at you, or pressuring you, or pushing you, or hindering you. I mean, it's absurdly stupid. But that's how far it's gone. So now, where this plays out today, you might find this is more common to you, what you've heard, especially in the schools today. In the schools, and even sadly say in our Catholic schools, sexual morality is often reduced to just consent. It doesn't matter what you do or how you do it, as long as you both agree. As long as she consents and you consent, well, up to you what you do. The main thing is that you respect one another and your consent. Sexual morality has been reduced to just a choice, a free choice of agreement together. Now that's absurd, right? And that leaves a lot of people broken and destroyed. But that's where we're at, especially in the state schools. Not all the Catholic schools, of course, but you'll find still teachers in the Catholic schools teaching that stuff in social studies and in biological science classes, because they know they can't do it in RE, or sometimes they can. So, I mean, this is a sign of a deep sickness when it doesn't matter what I'm doing or how I'm engaging with another as long as we both agree. And you know how far that can go, how perverted that can be. So this is a big problem today, a serious misunderstanding on freedom. Relativism, I'm sure we all know in basic terms what relativism is. Who would want to venture a description of relativism? Yeah.
That it just depends on the person. So it's when people say, like, oh, well, that's my truth.
Yep.
Or that's your truth. It's relative.
Yep.
Relative.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's essentially what it is. We won't go through the philosophical roots of it, how we've got to this, but essentially it's the ego. I place myself at the center of reality. I determine the real world, and I determine what's true or false in the real world, and therefore I determine what's good or bad. It's the sin of the Garden of Eden. The lie of the devil, just reach out, take the fruit, eat of it, your eyes will be opened, you'll be like God. God is a tyrant. We'll look at this later. He's holding you back. Eat the fruit, you'll be free of that oppression. You'll find who you are. You'll actually be equal to God. You will see things as he sees things. You determine what's right and wrong, what's good and evil. That's relativism today, and that's very, very strong today. It's the ego at the center. It's the I, the almighty I, making ourselves God. It's what the devil wanted to do in breaking free of God. He would love to be able to determine reality, but he can't. He has to be a servant of what God has made. And when the modern culture promotes relativism and I determine these things, it's what you'd say is a quasi-demonic culture. It's the sin of the devil to not want to be in reference. When I'm in reference to the truth who's outside me, and the truth measures me, and I have to be in relation to the truth and the falsity of things, and the good and the bad, and that's ultimately come from God, I'm in the real, and hopefully if I accept that, I'm being humble. But when I make myself the center that determines reality, yeah, I'm trying to take the place of God, and that's a sign of a demonic activity that does that normally. So the relativism of our time is not just a confusion. Many are confused. I'm not saying everyone's working with the devil. I'm saying what's in behind this mechanism is a demonic movement to cut man from reference to the truth, especially to God, and to leave him isolated and giving him the illusion that he determines the real. And he's at the center. So now I'm sure we know a few people like that. Now the theology of the body, the beauty of the theology of the body is it's going to get us very realistic. It's going to insert us into God's design on the body. It's going to insert us into the true complementarity on the body between man and woman and what that complementarity is for. So immediately, the realism of the theology of the body is going to ask of me a certain, or help me to respect there is a certain natural way that things work. That the body of the man is made to fit together with the body of the woman, not the man with the man and not the woman with the woman. So already when you begin to do a theology of the body, you're getting a very objective beginning point, not only from God, but also the realism of the body and its complementarity. I will begin to see immediately, this is why man is called to be with woman and woman with man, and not man with man and woman with woman. And this is the way that God made it. And then the question is, well, how does this end up in this other problem? We will look at that. We'll look at what are the causes of homosexuality and lesbianism and all of that kind of stuff, the identity issues there, and then the further identity issues with the transgenderism. We'll go into all of that and look at what's behind it so that we ourselves not only see the light of God's wisdom on the body, but then we see what goes wrong from original sin, from personal sin, from wounding in our psychology and the identity issues that can produce, right? So this is going to be a very, very helpful tool to understanding the climate of our time, to discern things well and healthily from a Catholic perspective. So that's coming, okay? So this is why I'm really encouraging to try to stay with it, stay with this course, because it'll unfold a lot of light on this stuff for us. Manichaeism, you can see there at the bottom of that first page. This is the main error that John Paul II names in the theology of the body that he's trying to fight against. Manichaeism is an old Gnostic heresy there around the time of Christ and even before him. St. Augustine, if you know his story, he was in the sect of the Manichaeans. And Monica prays and prays and prays, and then he finally leaves it behind because it's not satisfying. He can see there's major errors in it, and ultimately he converts and then becomes this incredible bishop and theologian and saint, of course. The Manichaeans, and they're from a guy called Manichae, or Mani in fact, his name's Mani, from modern day Iran. So in those days, the religion in Iran was not Islam, of course. It's Zoroastrianism and different mystical religions there, and these, what we call dualistic sects, S-E-C-T-S, so not S-E-X. A sect is a group, that normally is got someone leading it, a guru, and that's what this guy was. Mani was this guru, and they follow some ideology. And that ideology is often a religious ideology. So Mani was typical of his time. He thought that the world was broken into good and bad everywhere. And the good was the spiritual world, and the bad is the material world. And that's because their religious view thought that there was a good God and a bad God. There were two gods, kind of what they call the demiurge, or the urge and the demiurge. It's basically two sort of divine forces which are opposed. One made the spiritual world, one made the material world, and there we're trapped in this cage of the body. The spirit is good and the body is bad somehow. And the way to enlightenment, the way to salvation, and each different group had their different theology and philosophy, is you have to escape the body in some way. So this is the era of Manichaeism. It asserts that the soul is good and the body has got a sort of a negative aspect to it, and sometimes very bad. And you get different degrees of dualism. Some go as far as thinking that the body is so bad that we will kill the children. And some of them did in the Middle Ages. There was a Gnostic sect based on the same religious ideology that would suffocate the children because it was bad to be born into a body. Right, so medieval version of abortion, I suppose, because of a bad thinking. So John Paul II knows that this thinking has been present in various ways in the Catholic Church, but not in terms of a religious ideology, there's a good God and a bad God, but much more just more practical, that the soul we all know is good. But sometimes we have a negative view on the body, which is not right. It's not in God's perspective and God's wisdom, like we were saying, and thereby we need to be liberated from this wrong approach to our body. And when I was in France years ago, 30 years ago, I was in religious life, for those who may not be aware, and in the religious community where I was, there were a lot of young women who have big conversions from an indulgent way of life, sleeping with their boyfriends, then have big conversions and want to be nuns. And a lot of them took the habit, so they made their temporary vows. And after a couple of years, they took the habit off because they realized it wasn't their vocation. And what was going on psychologically, a little bit spiritually, was a running away from the body. They had a bad experience in their younger lives, living sinfully and indulgently. Then they convert and they realize, well, the soul has primacy. My soul is what is most important. It's what Jesus came to save. My body, I've lived it badly. And because they're wounded, they can't see how they are to live their sexuality in a beautiful Christian, holy way within marriage. And there they immediately want to go towards a celibate life, a continent life, because they can't compute how to live sexuality in a Christian way. And they're run into the arms of a religious community that is willing to put a habit on them. And thanks be to God, they're honest with themselves and they have good spiritual direction. They work this out over time and realize, okay, I've actually taken the habit for wrong reasons, slightly wrong reasons. And there they take the habit off, and then they realize actually, and this often happens when they've been healed. Spending many hours in adoration, praying deeply, coming to know the Lord more, they realize, okay, I have made a slightly premature decision here. Now, that can happen with many Christians, that process where conversion happens, a bad life has been lived previously, and a person struggles to compute. And see there they're carrying certain negative connotations on the body. They can't see how the living of their sexual desire can be properly moral and then properly Christian, and they struggle to work that out today. So that can lead to some bad behaviours, and we'll look at this. There's two ways we can tend to go. John Paul II mentions this explicitly numerous times, that the church has been marked by a Manichaean way of thought which is not healthy in various phases. Not always, not from the magisterium. We're not saying the church has ever taught error. We're just saying that there can be these wrong ways of thinking, and even from experience a little bit the wrong way of feeling towards the body, and it's not entirely Christian, and it needs to be purified. So that will come through strongly in the theology of the body. How good the body is. How the body is very beautiful, and it's given as a secondary dimension of who we are. And in fact, the body is actually in the image of God. You know how we normally say we're in the image and likeness of God? We think of our soul, we think of our intelligence and our will, because God is pure spirit and he has those. But at a secondary level, and this is in the Catechism now, and this is from John Paul II, because Christ took a body, and if the invisible God shows himself to us through the visibility of his own body, and he dies on the cross in that body to save us, then the body now has been divinized in a very, very strong way. And there, if we have a body, we see our body and the mystery of our body and what we're called to live in the light of Christ's body, especially his crucified body, and that gives us an incredible light on it, and it elevates our body to being in the image of God in a secondary way after our soul. So if our body is in that secondary imaging of God, then we must look after it. We must respect the body. We must honour the body, etc. But in the right way, of course. Today, part of the result of a culture of materialism, and we're coming on to it a bit later, actually it's the next one, it ties in well. is the cult of the body today. You know, Kim Kardashian and all of that, filling oneself with plastic, and looking like Frankenstein later in life. This is all thinking that the body's the only thing there is, and I will try to stop myself aging at all costs. I want my youth, my eternal youth, but at the material level. There's a sickness, ideological sickness, in the sense that I'm trying to preserve what is most qualitative, I think is most qualitative about my female form, and they're kind of a worship of the body. And I'm not saying it's wrong to go to the gym and be healthy and be fit. I'm not saying it's wrong to at least a woman to take care of her appearance. She wants to be beautiful, that's kind of built in, and we'll also talk about that. Nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes the thing that you are seeking most of all, you are in a cult of worship of the body in a way. And the way that the female form is used everywhere now, we know why the advertisements have it. We know why any good salesman will use the female form in advertising. But there's clearly a cult of the body at the level of the kind of the worship of the female form, and there's a kind of a cult of the body in the health industry now. Don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with eating natural foods and getting away from all the processed foods and all the sickness that's going on, all of the way we're killing ourselves probably by all that stuff. That's all fine. But it's when I'm so obsessed with my health, I'm so obsessed with my body, my soul is neglected. That's the issue. It's the inversion of things when my body is more important than my soul, or my soul doesn't exist. Now that's partly a response in another way to the dualism. It's one way you can go. We'll come back round to it. Is anyone feeling a bit hot? What's the temperature like in here? Is it hot? Could you? Is it okay if you just open the door just a bit more? Thank you. Just a little fresh air. Any thoughts on that at the moment? Comments? And are people in agreement? Yes. Okay. Yeah.
How do we reconcile what you were just talking about with in scripture a lot with St. Paul when he talks about the flesh is weak but the spirit is willing, and when we read a lot about that, it talks about a lot about the body is where the issue is. How do we reconcile what you're talking about with what St. Paul talks about?
Yep, very good. And we will look at that a lot. First of all, when Jesus in John chapter 6 says, the flesh has nothing to offer, it's the spirit that gives life, we must read that theologically. At that moment, what he's talking about in terms of the mystery of the Eucharist is that the flesh really is at the lowest level of the creation. It can't give what I'm giving here. What I'm giving in terms of the Eucharist is a divine gift that comes down from a spiritual source. So he's making a deliberate dialectic. He's not putting the flesh down in that sense. He's just saying, its truth and its goodness cannot give what I'm giving, so it doesn't have that to offer. But Paul, you're right, Paul talks about, I do what I shouldn't do, and I don't do what I should do. They're the tug of war between the spirit and the flesh, and the soul and the body. That's a result of sin. That's the tension that's in us now, even as redeemed, baptized Christians. There's a tension within us. And we will, when we go through the course, we're going to look at technically what has gone wrong, why that tension's there, how that tension is resolved naturally with virtue, and how it's resolved supernaturally with grace. But nonetheless, it's true. So in a fallen, broken world that we're in, yes, it doesn't mean when we speak about the goodness of the body and the rightness of desire, right, it's actually given originally from God. The way we live them now is often disordered. Not just because of the culture and our own family issues or whatever they might be, personal sin, but also just by nature. There's a tug of war within us by nature, and that's from original sin. Now, that's true. Paul is giving very good advice there, realistic spiritual advice, which will be repeated again and again and again by the church. All the spiritual writers, including the popes, and Pope John Paul II says it. Yeah, we've got to be aware that even if we assert the goodness of the body, and it has a secondary imaging of God, and the soul has a primacy, and this all has a dignity, nonetheless, we've got to be very careful, because there is this difficulty, and there's a weakness here. How do we manage that weakness in a Christian life? We will go through all of that as we go forward and break it down. So at the moment, but we're sort of laying the groundwork, and he'll do that when we come to it. What time are we? Are we 8 p.m.? Okay. We'll come to it tonight. We'll break down the structure of the theology of the body, and I'll show you sort of the progress of the Pope's thought, which is what we're going to follow, and it will dig in on all that kind of stuff and answer all those questions. It's a very good point, though. We're in also today, just coming on to the next one, if there's any other thoughts. We're in a culture of harmony as well. So even though we're in a kind of hedonism, the materialism produces a certain hedonism, which is just free reign, pleasurable pursuit, indulgence. Not everyone follows that, of course, because people still have a sense not only of their own human dignity, but even the body has limits. You know when you have fish and chips, if you eat too much of it, you feel sick. I've had enough, right? I satisfy my appetite. I have a longing for food. I think quick feed of fish and chips will satisfy that. But the way the fish and chips are, with its oil and its grease and the way it is, I immediately satisfy my hunger and my need for something palatable, and then now I'm full. And the appetite drops away. That's how the appetites work, and it's the same in the area of sexuality. Building up of an appetite, and then when there's a release, it drops away, right? Now, thanks be to God that's there in the body, otherwise we would indulge each other, indulge ourselves and each other to such a point where we would not stop. The reason that people stop gorging themselves is that they're full and they're going to be sick. And when a culture goes wrong, and the Romans did this, the Roman culture as it's collapsing, they had vomitoriums where they would gorge. This is the elite class, the nobles. They would eat themselves full on the most sumptuous foods, then go and stick their fingers down their throat and vomit it all back up in order that their appetite could immediately return. They didn't have to wait 4 or 5 hours for it to all go through them and out into the sewer and then be hungry again. They would get it all out of their stomach. They've enjoyed the taste of it, get it all out of the stomach, and within about half an hour I'm back hungry again. I can now get back into the good food. And that's hedonism. That's full-blown hedonism, right? And that can happen in the sexual sphere as well, where people just freely indulge and they look for every mechanism by which to restart their sexual desire in a perverted way, right? That goes on in certain parts of the society today. Now, because of the body and its rhythm, there are limits built in by God into our body. And even if a person is not very spiritual, and even if they deny the soul, they at least can recognize, if I eat too much and I never exercise and I have too much sexual encounter, I'll probably get a disease or I'll get sick. My body will be unwell. And there's a kind of a natural rectifying factor within us that stops us from going too far. And the philosophy that encapsulates this idea is called Epicureanism, from Epicure. He was a Roman philosopher, and he had the idea that the pursuit of life was sort of comfort, but not too much. Pleasure, but not the excessive pleasure where things will go wrong. I'll get sick, I will damage my body, and I'll damage others. But enough to make me comfortable. And that's very much the culture we have today, the majority. Not everyone's out in the nightclubs in a hedonistic way. Most people just want a lovely harmony in their life. And this is an Epicurean philosophy. I have the pie chart of my life. Here's my life, we know the pie chart. And here's a bit of God. Here's a bit of me. Here's a bit of friends. Here's a bit of work. Here's a bit of recreation. Here's a bit of, whatever else, hobbies. And then there's something else in here maybe that I fill up. And as long as I keep a nice sort of equilibrium here, not too much of anything, but just keep myself moderate in all things, there I live a nice, harmonious, tranquil, peaceful life. And nothing to excess, nothing to extreme. That's me. Comfortable, try to avoid suffering, no doubt, at the lack of things, but also avoid suffering with the excess of things. Just track a nice middle road. That's very, very prominent today. And that's an Epicurean philosophy of harmony, and it's not the truth. It's got a little bit of the truth in it, of course. But you know, when would we say as Christians, love God in moderation? Would we ever say that? No. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Right, we're supposed to be extremists in that regard, right? In the right way. We are to give everything to God and love Him above everything. And then, you know, to love one's family next after that, and one's children in an incredibly strong way. There shouldn't be this sort of equilibrium of harmony between the different parts of my life, right? So we'll look at this. What's this lacking? It's lacking the order. A Christian life has an order. What is first, what is second, what is third, what is fourth, etc. And that's a sign of wisdom. This is not a philosophy that has wisdom, because wisdom, the definition of the virtue of wisdom is that I see the priority of my loves clearly. That's wisdom. The wise man is the man who knows the priority of his loves, right, in right order. And this is the natural virtue of wisdom, and it's also a virtue that's a gift that's given to us by the Holy Spirit in baptism and confirmation, which perfects that natural virtue. So I think, you know, we'd meet a lot of people like this today, and a lot of Christians would live this way. And in fact, a lot of Christians might even, not all Christians, but you know, if you're in your local parish and you're having a sort of a get-together discussion, you might find people even presenting these ideas as if they were Catholic. But Father, you know, the Muslim jihadists, they love God too much. And they go to that extreme. You know, we've got to dial it back to make sure that our love of God is in moderation, because it can go too far. You can always have too much of a good thing, can't you, Father? That, you know, you will even find Catholics kind of asserting that, having adopted these ideas today. Any thoughts or comments on that? Okay. Historicism. This is what you find in Marxism. It's a kind of historical relativism that, and the reason I have it in here is that a lot of people think in a Marxist way today. So, you know, the communists, the socialists, that society is just a combat of the oppressor who has power and the oppressed who are the victim. And there's this cycle. The whole world is a cycle of those who had power and have power and wrongly use it, and those who don't have power and are victims. And the victim must rise up, overthrow those with power, and re-establish justice for the suffering victim. And that's because they've taken an idea from Karl Marx, and he took it from a certain view of history that he saw. He saw it in the creation, in the elements, you know, all the fight that goes on for survival among the animal kingdom and the biological kingdom. The vines fighting against the trees and the animals fighting against one another. And it's always, you know, this interaction of a thesis and an antithesis and something emerging more victorious out of this clash. That's a guy called Hegel, and he's a philosopher. He's a German philosopher who developed this idea that the whole world is just a combat of either material forces or ideas that clash, and from that clash emerges a better system. Marx picks it up and makes it what we call material dialecticism. So it's Marxism and communism. So communism basically sees it as, you know, the greedy people with the money oppressing the poor people. The poor people must rise up, overthrow the greedy people in violent revolution, and re-establish a just order for everybody, right? That's Marx, that's communists. Now, behind that, they have a materialist understanding of the world, which has come from Darwin, if you're interested, because Darwin saw all of this in nature. And there they see the world as just at the mercy of a cycle. This is the cycle of the world. And we're just part of it. And we're going to choose whether we'll be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. You know, you've heard those phrases said by all of those who protest today. You're either with the oppressed or you're with the oppressor. And that's the dynamic by which a lot of the young people in the universities today who come out with their sociological degrees of various kinds, they all have been brainwashed. Like, I'm serious about the brainwashing. They see the entire history of the world in this dynamic. And it's a serious misread of history. And if history has been this way the whole way, we are trapped. We're in this cycle. We're either just going to be on the right side of this cycle or the wrong side of it. And there it's a kind of relative. There's no truth. There's no moral truth. There's no higher governing cause. There's no providence of God that can sort out this mess. There's no goodness of human beings that will get things right and restore, when there is injustice, reestablish a right order. We're just part of a historical process. Now Marx disagreed with Hegel because Hegel was very pessimistic. Marx actually thought, no, we're not just going to be submitted to this. We have agency, freedom. We're going to fight out of this to try to restore some sort of justice. But he's still in the same mechanism. That's Marx, if you're interested. So, how does that trap us today? Well, if there are those who are oppressing some underclass, how does it play out in the sexual morality sphere? Well, I think it's quite obvious. The minorities, who are going to be the transgenders or those who might suffer from same-sex attraction, have always been oppressed. They must rise up and, even through violence if necessary, restore a just order to relieve the suffering that they have and find justice for them. You've heard it, I think, if you've been attentive in the last many years, last 20 years mainly, they talk about sexual justice in this regard. So it's a Marxist idea that sees it always as a dynamic of power and powerlessness. And now that's false. Not every human relation is a dynamic of power and powerlessness. There is love. And in families there's many relations of love. In many marriages there are relations of love. And in many communities there are relations of love. And we are in a relation of love with God, right? Through Christ. So it's not a dynamic. The whole history of the world is not just this dynamic. There are abuses, no doubt. But there's much more to the truth of history than this. And that's the danger for the Marxists. They only see it in that dynamic, which is sick. It's a sickness, really. There again, because it's relativist, there's no truth to be discoverable there. Psychology or psychologism, that only my human condition determines me. And you'll find that very strongly. It's related to the materialism. It's related to the hedonism. My psychological conditioning in my body and my wounds at that level determine me. They set my course and I have no way out. So you think of someone who has been wounded by difficulties in their body and they have psychological wounds. They struggle with certain issues. There's a denial in this by just thinking this is the way it is. I'm going to be stuck here. There's a denial of the power of grace to get us beyond that from a Christian perspective. And there's a denial at a certain level, subtle, a denial of my free will, that I can develop virtue that can get me beyond my conditioning by which I live a certain stable morality. Yeah.
It seems like this is almost a sense of hyper-realism.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
can't distinguish their condition, and they can't be mindful of what else might be.
Yep.
So they define themselves by their melody.
Yep, exactly. Yes, it's very true. Yeah, very true. And there I agree with your term hyperrealism, which was what we mean as a sort of a reductive realism. There's only one dimension of their reality kind of determining and blinding them, and they're only defined by their sickness. It's exactly right. And there I think that's true across the board for many wounds in family and in terms of sexual identity. And so for example, this will bear in on the question of what is homosexuality, where does it come from, and how do we deal with it? We would say, and this is the good treatment, we'd say, the way that God sees you, He doesn't limit you to your sexual difficulty. He sees you through the proper lens of His Son, who is the Redeemer, who's perfect in His body, and He redeems you in this difficult state. And there you must look at yourself through the eyes of Christ, seeing you the way He sees you, not the way the world tells you to be, or even the way you feel yourself to be according to your melody. And there's one of the first major steps to dealing with same-sex attraction, which might be a cross for someone to bear, is to help them not just only see themselves through that lens, but to see themselves in the eyes of Christ, which is it's the true perspective. If I can see myself the way Christ sees me, I'm in the real. I don't need to even worry about it. Has He got it right? He is right. He sees the real me. He loves the real me. I'm more than just my sexual conditioning or my sexual wounding and my sexual sins. As long as I go to confession and I've got that all cleaned up, the Lord, and even if I am in sin, the Lord still looks past my sins and sees the depth of the person He's made and wants to give forgiveness to. That's the perspective from a Christian view that I should have on myself. So it's vitally important for all of us, but especially, I suppose, those sort of subcategories, that we all see each other properly in this regard. And that's true not only the way that Jesus sees me and the way that I see myself, but the way we see each other. That, we can carry our wounds, we can have our bad reactions, we can even have a bad day, but we still try to think, no, this is someone I love who's just having a bad day. And I'm not going to reduce them to the one mistake they've made today, or even the big mistakes that they've made today. I will try to see further and love them and forgive them and keep loving them, etc. So the era of the psychologism is not only the person having a reduced version of themselves, but also sometimes we having a reduced version of other people. So, and only reducing them to their body or their psychological issue, etc. Okay, so coming to the end of this long list. Hopefully it's giving some light.
Do you think psychologism has the idea of an inherent fragility?
Yes, and in a right way and a wrong way. What I mean by that is there is an inherent fragility in all of us because of original sin and our personal sin. And God has deliberately left us fragile even after baptism and confirmation and Holy Communion. And even we retain our fragility in our human nature and our body all the way until we die. Sure, we can get stronger with virtue and we can be very strong in grace and become holy, but even the great saints remain a certain, they carry a fragility, right? And God has done that deliberately to keep us humble and that we learn to love others in their fragility. It asks of us not only mercy to ourselves and patience with ourselves and stay in the humble that I'm needing mercy, but it also asks of us mercy towards others and their fragility. So it asks an extension and outward movement of love. So it's very, very good at that level. And you know the famous phrases that you can, one of the ways you measure the health of a society or a community is how they treat the most weakest, what their regard is on those that are fragile. But the psychologism is emphasizing the fragility and defining the person by the fragility more than by the Father's gaze upon us. I shared a quote on Facebook just the other day, John Paul II, beautiful quote. We are more than just the sum of our weaknesses, but we are the sum of the Father's love for us. It's a proper Christian regard on the human person. So, and there are times when a person can feel overwhelmed by their weakness, and it can get the better of them, and they can be demoralized and even depressed on it. But in a Christian regard, we always must make that effort in hope to move out towards the Father through Christ and in the Spirit, to not let our fragility be the defining factor. So it's a truth, but not the whole truth, once again. So that's very consoling for all of us. Even if a person, and I'm not saying this is an excuse for not developing virtue and not working against vice, but even if a person carries a certain weakness their whole life, and this is going to be very true for someone who has what we call deep-seated homosexual or same-sex attraction, one that cannot be overcome, cannot be resolved. They have a fragility they have to carry their whole life until they die, and there God can love them. And in fact, it's the other way around. We often think, well, this is going to be a barrier to my progress. If we live it well, it won't be a barrier. It will actually be a help to my progress if I live it well in Christ and use my poverty as the springboard by which I must rely more on the mercy of Christ, more on the grace of Christ, more on the love of Christ every day. So, and this is what I would often say when I've given talks on same-sex attraction. There is a truth. We've got to look at it morally. We've got to talk about the virtue of chastity, the difficulty that all of that implies. But then we should turn it around in a mystical gaze and say, well, turn it into a beatitude. Just as we say, blessed are the poor, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those with same-sex attraction, and find the blessing that they have. There will be a grace for them if God has allowed this to happen to them. If they live it well, there will be a special glory in heaven for them. They'll be crowned. if they've lived that cross well in Christ, there will be a glory. So blessed, 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 just like the Exaltet says in the Easter proclamation. O happy sin, O necessary fault of Adam that's given us such a Redeemer. You know, the Latin says felix culpa, which is happy sin. It's so bizarre. We normally don't say happy sin. You know, imagine if your child came home and said, I'm so happy I committed a sin today, Dad. You're like, what? Let's have a talk. But yet the church sings that at Easter. O happy sin, O necessary fault of Adam that's given us such a Redeemer. Why would we say that? Because we see that out of the sin, God has brought enormous good. Christ has come to redeem us, and that blessing is infinitely greater compared to the sin, compared to the wounding, right? So, and there St. Paul says it in a beautiful way in Romans. You know, God has allowed everyone to be conceived in disobedience in order that he would show mercy to all. That's Christ. He's allowed us to all. Why do we have to carry the results of original sin on our shoulders? It doesn't feel very fair sometimes, right? You know, it was them. Adam and Eve did it. Why does it propagate downwards? Well, God has allowed it to propagate downwards, partly through the mechanisms that he's established in nature and as sort of a certain justice, but it's a mercy. Because then he gives me Christ, and Christ is a remedy and a blessing far greater than even the difficulty that I carry by carrying the wound of original sin and the consequences of that, even after baptism. Now, for someone who has SSA or any other difficulty of identity, because SSA is just an identity issue around who they are in relation to their mum and dad normally. If God has allowed a wounding and they're deeply wounded, then, oh, blessed wounding, because now I know I need Christ and I've got to let him save me all the more, and I have to rely on him all the more, and I have more suffering, but that suffering means I'll have more glory in heaven if I live it well. Yeah, sure.
You remind me that our society doesn't make this distinction that we're making between what is natural and what is unnatural.
Yes.
What is
Yes.
orderly and what is
Yes.
disorderly.
Yes, exactly, and totally agree with you. We have the blessing that the church makes those distinctions and we hear them, and then we see it in nature because we're realists and we're natural law people, 10 Commandments, that stuff. The modern world, by being in its all of these errors of various kinds, they're mainly materialists. They don't believe in nature. They just believe of fact, the fact of my material conditioning. And thereby, to talk about nature with a modern person, often they say, well, I don't believe there is such a thing as human nature in the sense that you're talking about it, that heterosexuality is the natural way and SSA is sort of the unnatural. I just say, I've got, there's just alternatives, there's just diversity.
So there's no, they would say there's no human logos or
Exactly,
human principle.
exactly.
It's just whatever is now.
That's it. That's exactly it. It's just, yes, just whatever I experience is my reality and my so-called nature. So you're absolutely right about the human logos. You know, the logos who is the Son of the Father. When we see in the real world the nature of things, I have a human nature, you have a human nature, we share the same human nature. There's the cow nature, there's the cat nature. All of those natures are a reflective of the eternal logos who is the Son. But we, at a derivative created level, that's uncreated. He's the uncreated fruit of the Father's intelligence, His Word, His Son. He's the one who incarnates and dies on the cross and then gives the Spirit. But that Son, that Logos, the Logos just means the concept or the governing principle in a way, or not the governing principle of God, but much more God's self-knowledge generates a concept of Himself, and that's His Son. And when we see something of that in God, we see it also reflected on earth, and we see that reflected on earth in the nature of things. When you see the ordered patterning of the cosmos, so we see it, and we see it well as Christians. We know there's a pattern to the way cats are, to the way dogs are, to the way all of the different species in the plants are, to the way the atoms are, to the way human beings are. All of that patterning, which we call nature, and the nature of entities, we believe has been given by God in the creation. He's created each thing with a nature, with a particular existence encapsulated with a nature. That's reflective of God and His own nature and the way that He knows Himself in His Son. The Logos there, and then what we see is a bit of a reflection of the Logos here in the patterning. Now the modern mind, you're absolutely right, doesn't accept that. And so when we speak of nature and acting according to our nature, which is a very realistic thing to say, a lot of people today would say, well, that's just your Christian view, or your sort of old medieval sort of Aristotelian view. I don't accept that there is a nature. I've just got my fact and my way I am in my body, and I believe I have a right to exercise my conditioning. So that's part of the psychologism we're talking about. So, yeah.
I was about to say Abuna because we say Father in our
Okay, yeah.
but they also deny the supernatural.
Yes.
And I'm thinking of most mystic professor. He
Yeah.
doesn't just distinguish between what is natural and unnatural,
Yeah.
but between unnatural, natural, and supernatural.
Yes.
We can become, like you said earlier,
Yep.
divinized.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of the theology of the body, because we're going to look at the natural being divinized and supernaturalized in Christ, and the body made for that. That's the whole eternal perspective of the body. But then you're right, when it goes wrong, it goes down into the unnatural, and the worst of that is really when there's a demonic twisting of the natural. And that's, we find that, I think, like for example, God bless him, we pray for him, but this transgender individual who was hearing voices and had a hatred of God and a hatred of the church, and he was shooting up Christ with his gun, and he was clearly wounded and deeply disturbed and probably had some demonic influence upon him. So the more you go down into the unnatural, the more and more contact you're going to have with the demonic by definition of the way it goes, because it's a movement away from God. So you're absolutely right, yeah. And that's an important point, I think, that we take as established sort of reality that we all have a human nature and that we must act according to our nature. And for those that might have SSA, we're going to help them just live their difficulty in the best Christian way possible. The world certainly will not see it that way. And when I've had some pastoral encounters many years ago now, these were the truths that were debated when I was encountering someone who had same-sex attraction.
Several thoughts, and you said, Father, in your homily, I think, last Sunday, that if you're against nature, then it leads to violence.
Yeah.
And we live in a society where you have to be special, and that fuels the whole idea of being trans or being, whatever pronouns you give yourself, or being a tiger, or being whatever you think you are. And it leads people to commit violence against themselves. I mean, the obvious one is when women go for top surgery, or men try to become women, women try to become men.
Yeah.
But also, I saw an interview with a young woman who said she didn't feel right being able to see. She blinded herself.
Yeah.
And she was young. She was 20s.
Yeah, I saw
something
that.
like that. And, so you go against nature and you commit violence against yourself or against other people.
Yeah, I think that's right. No, it's not an absolute well, no, actually, I take that back. I think it's always a necessary connection, but it may not always play out in the same way. Unfortunately, with this individual in Minneapolis, it played out in a terrible, terrible way against children. But yeah, to go against nature is by definition going to do violence against nature. Because Aristotle, the reasoning behind this is Aristotle says that whatever is unnatural or runs counter to nature is by definition going to be violent. That's the opposite of nature, is violence. So unnatural essentially is violent because you're hindering, you're acting willfully against the proper growth of nature in the right direction. Therefore, you must be using some aggressive move against nature, which means violence. So, okay, now you can argue that we've all got a bit of a disorder in us because of original sin. And there, I suppose Jordan Peterson's right that within every person there is a danger that they could erupt into violence given the wrong inputs, the wrong conditioning and environmental pressures. So whilst we talk about the danger of this whole culture being violent, we must also recognize that we're all, in a way, caught up with a struggle between grace and sin. And every time we sin, in a way, we're doing violence against what is right in the world. So we're all a little bit in this fight to move much more into the right orderedness and the peacefulness of God and away from the things that attack love and attack nature. So the reason I say that is just so that we don't, in a way, to create a kind of an us and them kind of group. We're kind of all in the struggle, but there are those who more clearly and willfully act more directly against their nature and their own body. So that the trends and the surgery movement is very clearly in that. But we actually kind of do violence to our own nature every time we sin in a certain way. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that's why it's no surprise that it erupts in gun violence. There's going to be a disturbance. And most people won't go that far. But you are setting up all the foundation for that to arrive in a small subset of that group. And yeah, it's painful. Yeah, and the world will never admit that it's creating this. Yeah, yeah.
While we're on this topic, and maybe it's worth sharing that I went through that, and I felt like I was saying I'm hurting, and mainstream society handed me a knife.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. So you felt like the society was handing you a knife.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. And I think that's a very real testimony. I think that's reflective of what the reality is. Thanks be to God, you're out of that. Yeah, beautiful. It's and there we're in a society that's bemoans the harm, but yet is propagating the very thing that creates the harm. So there's this weird, vicious cycle. And that's not just the transgender identity issue, but we create the issue that produces broken families, and then we bemoan the broken families. And, all of these areas, we've set everything up. The pornography, we bemoan all the pornography, and yet we pass laws that allow for the freedom of expression of pornography. It's such a suicidal society that we're in that regard, because we're obsessed with freedom. We're obsessed with certain...
But people who are making those laws probably are people who believe that we're overpopulated and they want us all to kill ourselves.
Well, some people. I wouldn't say that's universal, but yeah, there are ideologues that have these sick maneuvers. Yeah. Okay.
Father,
Yeah.
can we perhaps add another
Sure.
ism,
Yeah.
which is the one we're currently talking about,
Yeah.
anarchism, or the contempt for order?
Contempt for order.
Contempt for order, or
Yep.
the contempt for hierarchy.
Yes.
I think there's a
Yes.
seed of
Yes.
anarchism in Marxism, and
Yes.
the contempt for
Yep.
I think it's manifested today, and
Yeah.
Peterson talks a lot about
Yeah.
the contempt for value and
Yeah.
hierarchies of value.
Yeah. No, it's very true. And I would say that's partly, that's a sign. Well, it's actually a fruit of many things, but the one thing I think is as soon as you're in an atheistic society, rejecting God, you don't want to be in that order, us second to him, and then you will begin, when you've eclipsed him, and there's only the material processes, you still should see some order in the creation, and then still see some order in us over the creation, all of that. But the more that runs, there will...
I'm also
Yeah.
thinking of what you said earlier, that
Yeah,
the impulse to not be defined by an external reference
Yep.
is
Yep.
the
Very
original
much.
demonic sin.
That's exactly right. And I was about to say something similar, that the rejection of this order, this holy order hierarchy, is a sign of the demonic. Ultimately, we're not saying everybody's in league with the devil or anything like that, but ultimately behind it, the rejection of our creaturely status and our position within the cosmos and the right order of things under God, is what the devil rejects. And in fact, for those who know me and have heard me preach and the homilies, been through the marriage prep, one of the causes, according to Augustine, Thomas Aquinas picks this up and furthers it. One of the causes of the fall of the devil is the fact that he rejects the order of mercy and he only prefers the order of justice. Because it doesn't make any sense that the devil would reject God, reject serving God. He knows God's the source of his being. All the angels are created in a suspended state. So they're created in a way in potentiality, and the only way they're fully actualized in their angelic life, with their intelligence and their will being fully united to God as their end, before they enter that vision of seeing God face to face, they're created in a suspended state and offered a choice. Will you serve? And there, the famous phrase of the devil, non serviam, I will not serve. Now, why would you say no to God when you see him as your final end, the source of your being, the source of all your happiness? He's full light and love. It doesn't make any sense. It's insane that you would just choose yourself over that. there must be probably some other mechanism that causes the pride of the devil to rise, by which he will say, I will not serve. And it's probably this: you will have to serve what's lower than you, and what's weaker than you, and what is less perfect than you, the human beings. I'm asking you to serve them. And that's an order of mercy, because in justice, normally, the more perfect is loved more than the less perfect. The stronger is loved more than the weaker in an order of justice, normally. But in an order of mercy, it's normally the weaker one who's loved more, the imperfect one who's loved more. It's an order of love, in fact. And that's what the devil revolts against. I won't serve that. They're muddy little creatures who are weak. Here am I. Look at my beautiful angelic nature. I won't serve this. And he never sees the face of God and falls. And a third of them, they say, went with him. Now it's folly, stupidity, but we do stupid things in pride. All the time, in fact. So, the whole world is built on pride today, really. But I think he's rejecting the divine order of mercy, but also, in a certain way, also the divine order of justice as well. So, the rejection of order is very strong today, a sign of the demonic. And the Marxism picks up on this and tries to equalize and flatten everything.
You remind me as well, Father, that the Eastern Fathers say that the human nature was created for the incarnation.
Yeah.
To furnish it.
Yep. Yep.
So if Satan has contempt for the human nature, he also has contempt for Christ.
Yep. And that's where we can add a little bit more to our reflection on the fall of the devil. This is speculative theology. It's worth just looking at briefly, but it's a good theology. This is Augustine. This is Thomas Aquinas. Building on what you're saying rightly, there's good theology that says that not only is the devil asked to serve man who's lower than him, because remember, when the devil's made, man has not been made. So what God is revealing in an instant is a sort of a vision to the mind of the angelic intelligence of Lucifer. This is what I intend. Now, the speculation of the church is that not only does God show that he intends to not only, he's made spiritual life, here's all the angelic orders, but now he intends to make material existence, which is lower than spirit. And the scandal for the devil, I'm going to unite spirit and matter together in the human person, this weakling. And you must serve this, but also further, and this is the further speculation, that I intend to enter, I'm not just uniting matter and spirit, but I'm going to unite matter and the divinity. That's the incarnation. Now that blows the mind of the devil if that's the truth. He would think there's no way. This is outrageous that you would think this and propose this, and that you're going to do it in the womb of a woman. That come through this little one who's muddy and messy and bloody. So this is outrageous. I reject your plan. And that's some of the speculation of the church, that God had always intended to incarnate. And that's the debate, for those who want to know, between the Franciscans and the Dominicans in the church. Saint Bonaventure, who says God was always intending to incarnate, and the Dominicans, and St. Thomas Aquinas says it's a moot point because God always knew we were going to fall, and therefore he was always intending to incarnate because of the fall in his eternal mind, and therefore in the creed we say, for us men and for our salvation, he came down from heaven. So that's the cause. Our salvation is the cause of his coming down. So Thomas takes that position. They're both right in a certain way. It's just two different lights on the same mystery that can be held together. But it's right. The attack on the human body, the rejection of order, in the modern culture today is it's definitely reflective of a demonic, a satanic attack on Christ and on the body. All the abortion today is an attack on human life, but it's ultimately an attack against the incarnation. The hatred of the devil against the spiritual, incarnate, material life of man. And to try to divide, to try to rub that out. He couldn't do it with the incarnation, but he'll try to do it now. And there's a beautiful reflection from Alice von Hildebrandt. You don't need to know who she is, but she's a philosopher who was married to a famous German philosopher, Dietrich von Hildebrandt, and he stood against Hitler. He's one of the few Germans who stood up against Hitler and then had to flee to the United States. He eventually got married after his first wife died. He married Alice von Hildebrandt. And she has a beautiful little phrase, I've just got to remember it, that in the garden God promises that the snake who had whispered lies to the first woman No. What is it? Just got to get the right parallel here. The second Eve, the new Eve, has crushed the head of the serpent as he whispered for the destruction of her offspring. But now the serpent has re-emerged and has whispered to women today to crush the head of their offspring. So it's the reverse of what is prophesied as the remedy in the Garden of Eden is now playing out in a horrible demonic way, but in this way with women, murdering their own children. And now, no judgment on any woman who might have been through that. We know the complexities, and God is merciful; He will forgive always. But nonetheless, this is horrific violence against the most vulnerable. So, I think all abortion now ultimately is an attack,
So,
by the devil.
One more thing.
Sure.
You remind me that in the ancient world,
Yeah,
to attack an image
yeah,
is to attack the one depicted
yeah.
in the image.
Yeah. No, it's very true, and we'll come on to that in pornography. In pornography, there is a bit of a link, I think, that in Christ the Word is made flesh, and in pornography it's the flesh made Word in a certain way. It's the reverse. We'll look at that, how it's undermining that truth, not only of us, but of Christ. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so pressing on, we're coming into the final sort of part of our class. Any other thoughts anyone wants to add? Is it sort of engaging, enlightening? Sure, because I know it can get hot in here, and I know everyone starts to think about going to sleep. It can get a bit tiring, and I know that I can talk. So I just want to make sure that it's reaching a certain resonance and satisfaction. Okay, there's definitely what we call a phenomenological ideology today, which is where really only personal experience counts. This relates to the relativism, relates to the psychologism, but I reference everything in me again. My consciousness, my lived experience is where I will determine the right or wrong of things. It's another version of a kind of relativism, very strong, because we're very big on personal experience, and in some ways it's got a certain truth in it. We want to respect the lived experiences of individuals, listen to their struggles, listen to their sufferings, listen to their ups and downs, and help them through. We don't want to just download a doctrine onto people and say, just take it and live by it. We've got to understand that it takes time for people to understand and move. That's at the level of our Christian life. But I think that's very true across the board, that all the education today is trying to sort of meet people in their needs, be attentive to how they receive what we impart, all of that. There's a little bit of truth in it, but it obviously is part of a problem, a wider common problem we've already outlined. The artistic domination of nature, the final little ideology we're looking at here, self-assertion determines. So this is the primacy of art over nature. So once again, it relates to what we've been talking about, that man, the artist, man, the worker, man, the creator, really should be free of his nature to do what he asserts. And shouldn't be constrained by any of the principles of nature or the morality that can be derived from nature. So the natural moral law that we normally talk about, which is very much encapsulated in the Ten Commandments, but we can add more. No one wants to hear about those constraints today, because it sounds to the modern mind, it sounds like the Catholic Church especially, or any other ethicist, saying no, 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 no. And they want to be able to say, but. I want to be free to make my own way. I want to be free to create my own life, to determine my existence, to build and construct my way. It's very much modern man, isn't it? That we want to be original. We don't want to listen to our forefathers, to our culture, to the traditions of our elders. We don't want to listen to our religion, especially the popes, because they're all fuddy-duddies, celibates in Rome who don't understand me. I want to be free to make my own life according to my own lights. That's the dominance of the artistic self over what I would normally consider, here's my nature, and this is where I will move to find flourishment and happiness, and then enter into the supernature, which is what Christ gives me in grace. Now that's very strong today, and you find that across many spheres. It's not only the transgender who imagines that they're in the wrong body and then wants to redesign the body to fit their imagination and their wounding. It's also in all of these ways where people dress up as animals and go and do the cosplay. That's the real thing where they get their true identity. It's in the sphere of bioethics now as well, where in the creation of human life we want to design the baby that doesn't have any defects. It's the domination of human technology over nature. That we want to be able to remove if there's any genetic defects in the little embryo with the gene editing they've got running now. It's very basic at the moment, but the gene editing is going to get better. They're going to get to a point where they can probably go in and recalibrate the genes that might be off to produce the perfect human being who's not going to get cancer, who's not going to get sick, this, that, right? So it's the domination of human art, human skill, human craft over nature, which is again a sign of the demonic trying to play God, trying to be free of God, trying to be free of the constraints of my nature, trying to be free of reference to outside calls of God. So I know I'm repeating myself, but this is all part and parcel of what we're facing today. So it just highlights stronger and stronger and stronger the need to have the right view on the human person, on the human body, and to have a Christian regard on the human person and the human body. The Catholic regard, in other words. Coming into the final little period. Any hands up? Any questions from the young ones? Are we following? Okay.
Father,
Yes, Paul.
you know, in this, even the mind and consciousness state is really relative, isn't it? They say they talk about the drugs mind altering drugs, and they say everything by the church is a social construct. The male and female social construct. There's nothing real. There's no reality.
Mm-hmm.
And they reject the church and there's some Catholics still believe in God, but they still all these new age ideas, all this consciousness. What the hell it is? I just can't. It's very hard to go against that. I just don't understand.
Yeah, I agree at one level that it's very hard to argue against someone who denies nature, is only a materialist.
Yeah.
And what I would suggest, and this is true for all of us, when we're facing an atheist who might be a materialist and believes everything is a social construct, that we need to get them back to their personal experience to show them that they don't live what they say. The atheist who gets married and promises certain vows and things in their ceremony of marriage is telling lies, really, if they really are an atheist. Because how can you promise anything if we're only material and we're always in movement? Because matter is always in movement. Right down at the atomic level, there's just still vibration going on all the time. How can you promise anything if you're unstable? And if the other one's unstable, how can you receive a promise of anything? You don't really believe, if you're an atheist, full-blown atheist or a materialist, you've got to find in their life where they are living something real, and that real will contradict their ideology. And that's normally the mechanism. You take them back to their lived experience, especially around love. You can do it around a little bit the intellectual pursuit of truth, but it's harder. It's much better to go to the affective level, the level of the heart, and to look at one's life and say, well, do you live what you profess? And find there often that they don't. If you're truly the materialist, that everything's a social construct, why are you constructing this thing that probably will never last? Well, how could you have ever promised anything in a marriage, in the vows of marriage, when you don't believe that anything's stable? That's a lie. A person who doesn't believe anything's stable, which by definition the materialists are in that instability, relativism, all of that, you're actually going to be telling lies. And I remember confronting an atheist along these lines, and he admitted, yeah, I just made it up. And so there you've actually found you're actually fairly dislikable, unlikable person now. And that's sometimes where we get to. There was a famous debate with Trent Horn debating Destiny, online personalities. Destiny's a famous atheist, very clever, knows how to argue. Trent Horn is a very good Catholic apologist and is one of the best I've seen around abortion and the pro-life stuff. And at the very end, Trent had to just say, because he trapped him, and he said, and he admitted that he would just murder children. And he said, well, you're a monster. There's nowhere to go from here. You've just admitted you're a monster. And how do you argue out of that position? He's admitted that he would murder children if it was necessary for a greater good. And there, Aristotle says this. This is a quote from Aristotle. For those who advocate matricide, there is no more reasoning, only beating. There's no point in arguing. You may as well just beat them. So he's not saying do that. What he's saying is when you're in front of that kind of immorality, that the person believes that they should be able to just kill their mother for no reason, you're not dealing with a rational human being. You can't talk rationally anymore. You may as well just get rid of them, push them out the way, kind of thing. And I think there are times when we're in the face of that kind of dishonesty. Not just no, it's actually where they're honest, but you face a very immoral person. And what you hope for there is to then say, well, let's be friends. Because only through friendship will we begin to help the person grow in their will of love, to grow in their goodness and come out of their immorality. So sometimes, yes, I agree, if a person's really dangerous, we get away from them when we might put them in prison, if they're a danger to others and the society, right? Legitimately, we imprison people when they're a danger. But there are other people who may not be a danger to others, that just have very sick ideas and they're very immoral in the way that they consider living. The best way to help them out is to love them as friends and to build a friendship with them and help them love. Because the more you help them love, the more they will grow in their will of goodness and will of efficiency towards you, because they sense that you see something in them beyond their immorality. Like we were saying, we're not reducing them just to their bad ideas or their bad intentions. We're willing to go further. Now that's a matter of prudence. You won't do that with everybody, and you don't always have time to do that with everybody. And if you're a parent of young children, you're going to spend your time there. But there are many other times where we think, okay, I'm going to see if I can love you, and if I can get you to return love to me. And it may not be possible sometimes. Sometimes a person prefers their darkness. But okay, that's at the level of the mechanism by which I might help reach a person. But in terms of how do I debate someone who denies fundamental truths, I've got to try to find a place in their life where they don't live what they're denying. And normally marriage is the most obvious place. And I haven't gone through all the steps very well with you when I was describing that. But when you are a materialist, and you go through all the consequential positions of a materialist, they can't get married. They don't actually believe in love. They're just believing in mutual use. And that's what he admitted to me in the end. I just married her to use her. And I told her in the end. And she seemed to be okay with that. And we mutually agreed to use one another. And there you're just like, whoa, okay, we've got a bit, we're reaching the bottom. And there, that is true. If you know the history of philosophy in the recent centuries, a modern day philosopher, he's now dead, he's an American, Richard Rorty. Richard Rorty came to that position that there's really nothing of meaning anywhere. He's a full-blown nominalist, where there's nothing of nature. All I see is a few colours and forms out there. I don't even know that you guys really exist. But nonetheless, my mind paints you up into it. There's entities. You definitely are there in terms of entities. But I don't know if you're fellow human beings or not. My mind constructs and paints the world in such a way that I can use you in some way for some mutual benefit. And you do the same for me. And that's the way the society works. We paint the world in a sort of a common way for mutual use. And that's the philosophy of Richard Rorty. And yet he's married with 3 kids. And so, he's not living what he really says, to be honest, because you can't, your experience of love contradicts that completely, right? He would love his children and lay down his life for them, probably. So he's playing with ideas, and that's where you find a lot of these people, not just philosophers, but others in the real world, are often just playing with ideas. And that's where loving a person, developing the friendship, we might touch the real person more. And realize, okay, I'm starting to get to a sense of why you hold these ideas. And it may not be intellectual, it might be more at the level of affectivity, my emotional difficulties or whatever. But no, it's still worth engaging. Yeah, but you have hit on a point, you're right, about we find this in the church. A lot of Catholics believe that the priesthood and the hierarchy in the church, popes, bishops, priesthood, deacon and that, is socially constructed. And thereby we've got to work with a Marxist mechanism inside the church to break down the hierarchy. And they don't just do that in terms of undermining the priesthood, but even in the sanctuaries of the church, we must never have things elevated because it looks like there's a special class in the sanctuary who are above others. Everything should be flattened and equalized in the church. and you get rid of all of the barriers. So the altar rails have to go, because that implies there's a class distinction. Not because this is holy and where the sacrifice is happening and this is where we're adoring from, and the altar rail is the communion table where you receive communion. They've totally misunderstood it. They see the altar rail as simply a class barrier in a Marxist way between the oppressive aristocracy priesthood and the pauper laity in the pews. So get rid of all those distinctions. That's what's been behind all of this through the 20th century, if you're interested. This kind of dynamic to get rid of the distinctions. And that's because a lot of people don't accept a divinely established hierarchy in the church and redemption and think of it only in a relativistic way as a social construct that we can remake. No, that's utterly wrong, and we must fight it. But it's just where it overflows into the church, very strong in the church, and we've seen this play out. You were going to add something.
So much so, even so-called a lot of, the so-called non-practicing Catholic, they accept that sort of ideology. They say everything is man-made, hierarchy and all that, and the rules and all that in the church.
Yeah.
And they reject them totally, and now they have this level of consciousness. I find my own happiness now.
What you're describing there is a combination of everything we've spoken about,
Yes.
but then I would add one further thing. It's the theological heresy of modernism. And so what modernism is, in the 2 minutes that really remain, is taking all of these philosophical and scientific ideas of evolution, Darwinism, importing them into an ecclesial context, so into the church, mixing them with theology, and you end up downgrading theology to naturalizing it. And the naturalization of our theology produces a thing called modernism, and that has produced all these problems in the church. I think it's probably time to stop, to be honest. I can see some people have had enough of me talking. I know it's a lot this evening. It was sort of a download of a lot of preamble. 2 minutes. I'll give you the structure. You'll see them in the notes. Just 2 minutes. John Paul II's theology of the body goes through three major phases. One, he looks at what is called original man. And this is man in the Garden of Eden. If we're to understand who we are, what the original intention of God was, including on the body, and then what we're still called to live now at a natural level, we need to know something of our reflections in Genesis. Then he looks at historical man. And this breaks into two: fallen man and redeemed man. Obviously, that's in history. And then he looks at glorified man, which is our life in glory. And all of this is done to understand how the body, the human body, fits in here. So both in the creation and in the redemption, what is the meaning of the human body in all of this? Very beautiful. So we're moving into that after our first preamble. Let's finish with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Saint John Paul II, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks, everybody.